Tonight, the UK's budget watchdog sounds the alarm. The UK's finances are in a vulnerable position. Rachel Reeves and the Treasury are told by the Office for Budget Responsibility the UK is in an unsustainable position in the long run. Meanwhile, resident doctors in England vote to go on strike, saying the 5.4% pay rise they've been offered isn't enough. Also tonight, the French President Emmanuel Macron addresses the UK Parliament, saying Europe needs to end its dependency on China and the United States. The government says it's going to promptly respond after the inquiry into the post office scandal calls for urgent action on the issue of compensation. Plus, MP James McMurdock now says he's quitting Reform UK after allegations in the Sunday Times about his business affairs. And Lord Norman Tebbit dies at the age of 94. We'll look back at the life of Margaret Thatcher's most staunch True Blue ally. All that and more with Luke Sullivan and Daisy McAndrew, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Tuesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. Now, before we get stuck into the politics, we're just going to begin with some other news this evening. And this is following reports that the TV presenter Greg Wallace has been sacked from the TV show MasterChef. He's hit out at the BBC ahead of the publication of an investigation into allegations about his conduct, insisting he will not go quietly. Now, Sky's Amelia Harper at House Mall and joins us now. Amelia, what can you tell us?
Well, Greg Wallace this evening has issued some very fiery remarks amid reports that he has been dropped or sacked by MasterChef, which is the BBC's flagship cookery programme. And in a statement on Instagram, he has said he will not be going quietly. Now, Greg Wallace has been the subject of an investigation into historical allegations about his conduct during his period of time while he worked at the BBC. And this was an investigation commissioned by the production company that makes MasterChef, Badenoch UK, and the report was due to be published in the coming days, potentially at some point this week or next week. And Greg Wallace's statement came just days before that, really. And it also comes as 50 more people have now approached the BBC with fresh claims about alleged misconduct. Greg Wallace denies those claims. Just to rewind a little bit with how we got here, Greg Wallace stepped back from presenting MasterChef in November last year after the BBC were approached by individuals with allegations about misconduct. They ranged from inappropriate comments and actions over a range of programmes over 17 years. And if we go over this statement on Instagram, Greg Wallace said he wanted to speak out ahead of the publication of this report. He said, after 21 years of loyal service to the BBC, I can't sit in silence while my reputation is further damaged to protect others. He admits in the report, he says, that the report found him primarily guilty of inappropriate language between 2005 and 2018. But he said he'd been cleared of the most serious and sensational accusations made against him. And he said also that he'd been hired to host MasterChef as this cheeky greengrocer, but now apparently his statement says that is part of the problem. And we've had a response from the BBC. A spokesperson for the BBC has said Badenoch UK instructed the law firm Lewis Silkin to run an investigation into allegations against Greg Wallace. We are not going to comment until the investigation is complete and the findings are published. Badenoch UK also saying they're not going to comment until that report, which is due in the coming days.
Thank you very much indeed for bringing us up to speed on that, Amelia Harper there. Now back to the politics, because the Office for Budget Responsibility has just given one of the most quietly damning assessments of the state of the UK economy. Now, these are the spreadsheet guys. You're not going to get headline-grabbing praise from them. But I just want to read you a couple of things from their report today, because it might not sound like much, but this is really the OBR equivalent of using capital letters and underlining everything twice and saying, please, can politicians pay attention to this and do something about it? So this is how it starts. They say the UK's public finances have emerged from a series of major global economic shocks in a vulnerable position. The UK government faces the third highest borrowing costs of any advanced economy after New Zealand and Iceland. I mean, that doesn't sound great, we're being charged more to borrow money than every other advanced economy other than New Zealand and Iceland. And they also say that because of the ageing population, debt is on track to hit 270% of GDP by 2017. But look, things then get more pointed. They continue. In the aftermath of the shocks, debt has also continued to rise and borrowing remains elevated because governments have reversed plans to consolidate the public finances. Planned tax rises have been reversed and, more significantly, planned spending reductions have been abandoned. Now, this is the OBR saying, politicians of all parties, can you please get your act together? Because these difficult problems need difficult solutions. And at the minute, it does feel like we're just getting easy answers still. Efficiency savings, tax rises, but only for, other people. The OBR describes the UK fiscal outlook as daunting. So surely it's time for a grown-up conversation about the challenges we face and bravery from our politicians if they're going to rise to meet the scale of the challenge. Well, our data and economics editor, Ed Conway, has been taking a look through the numbers.
So shall I start with the good news? The good news is that Britain does not have the highest deficit in terms of government deficit, borrowing, in the developed world. The bad news, if we kind of zoom over here, is that we're pretty high, actually. There's only 4 countries that have higher deficits than the UK does. One of them is Israel, which is at war, so it's spending a lot of money for that. And one of them is run by Donald Trump, the US, and there's the UK. So deficit, the amount of borrowing that the government does each year, that is really high. And that's one of the risks, the fiscal risks that the Office of Budget Responsibility has been talking about. The other issue, OK, is if you look just not at annual borrowing, so the amount that we're borrowing each year, but at the total national debt, so this is the national debt, that is showing you advanced economies, the average amongst countries around the world. This is the UK. So look, the UK, the total national debt, the amount that we owe as a nation, nearly 100% of GDP. Now, that probably sounds a little bit scary. If you do think it is scary, then look away now, because we're about to have something even scarier, which is if we zoom out and look ahead into the future, so all the way through to the 2070s, and look at what happens to this red line based on official forecasts, or at least projections of where we're heading right now. Look at that, it's terrifying. The national debt heading up to 274% of GDP. Totally unprecedented, or at least outside of wartime. And the OBR says that's down to a number of factors. So first of all, you've got the government spending more money and borrowing more money. And part of one way of reflecting this is by looking at just how much every year, every time we have a budget, what do they say is going to happen to the national debt? That's what they say is going to happen to the national debt. This is what actually happens. Look at that. That's what actually happens. So they say the national debt is going to go up for a little bit and trust us, it's going to come down. In reality, it just goes up and up and up and up. And that's how you get lines like that. This is based on what's happened over the last kind of 15 years or so. So it's reality rather than projection. And part of the story here is that pensions are getting more expensive. So you've got an ageing population, you've got quite a lot of generosity in the pension system, which means that that line goes up. Pensions get more expensive, benefits get more expensive, and then on top of that, you've got other commitments like net zero. That's going to cost quite a lot of money as well, because we need to invest more in the coming years. That's extra spending. Invest more in the coming years in all of that technology to try and reduce our emissions. But also, perhaps even more importantly, well, definitely more importantly for the government, all this money, or the vast majority of this, is the fuel duty that would have come in from petrol cars, which just isn't in there anymore because you've got electric cars. So add it all up, and you can see why the Office of Budget Responsibility is so concerned about all of these risks facing the public finances.
Ed Conway there, really delving into some of those numbers for you. Well, just to add, I guess, to the looming headache for the government today, the resident doctors in England have voted in favour of strike action. The Health Secretary said they couldn't go further on pay this year.
It's disappointing that, given this government, since coming to office, have given resident doctors a 28.9% pay rise, and that a majority of resident doctors didn't even vote for strike action, that the BMA is now preparing to take that action, which puts at risk so much of the progress we're making on the NHS, where it feels like the NHS is finally moving in the right direction. So I met with the resident doctors today to urge them, even at this late stage, to work with a government that wants to work with them.
Frustrating there. Well, our health correspondent Laura Badenoch joins us now for more on this. We heard there, I guess, the pretty kind of punchy remarks from the government, but you've been talking to some of those doctors, right?
Yeah, and you see both sides, really. I mean, the Health Secretary very much at pains to point out that the resident doctors, they're the medics formerly known as junior doctors, have had a lot more money. One of the first things he did since taking office was restart those negotiations and end, the ongoing industrial action last year. He says, look, they've received the highest pay award of the entire public sector. But the BMA, the resident doctors, say it's not enough, basically, because their real terms pay is still 21% where it was in 2008, and they want pay restoration, as they're calling it, basically more money. Now, you remember from the last set of strikes we had, it was really disruptive for patients. 1.5 million appointments, treatments, procedures, operations ended up being cancelled or postponed. So not great for patients. And I put that, just minutes after they'd met the Health Secretary, I put that to the BMA and said to them, how can you justify more strike action with your patients? Here's what they said.
I think we're very cognizant as doctors of the disruption that strikes can cause. We don't take strike action lightly, and we don't want to have to go out on strikes. I can be quite frank to say I am a paediatric trainee, work with children and families. It would be better for the patients if I was actually at work. I don't want to have to take that step. Mr. Streeting, if he wants to invest in the NHS, if he wants to work with doctors, if he wants to retain doctors, all he needs to do is actually offer us a credible offer to keep us on the journey to pay restoration, and then we don't need to have a single strike.
And Laura, it feels to me like, we just marked a year of Keir Starmer's government, and one of the big achievements they talk about is the NHS and reducing waiting times and all that. But I guess if we do enter this period of strike action again, do you think that could jeopardise some of the progress that's been made?
I think it does threaten that. There is some pretty bullish targets out there that, aren't quite on track to be being met. We've had the 10-year plan, this much hyped big announcement for the future of the NHS just a few days ago, and now talk of more strikes. It's a moment of jeopardy, I think. So we're at this strange stalemate, really, where the government's saying there's no more money, but we're happy to talk about working conditions. The BMA now has this mandate where they could go on strike. They say, look, the meeting was reflexive. They said we felt heard, but ultimately it's the actions that really matter. And I think if there isn't enough action for the BMA, then strikes are a possibility, and they could come as soon as the end of this month.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Really good to have you on to explain all of that. Well, earlier I spoke with the Energy Minister, Shanks, about some of those warnings about the UK economy and also about the threat of strikes affecting the NHS. Thank you so much for being on the programme. So the OBR has released an assessment of the UK economy today, and I'll be honest, it's pretty depressing reading. Sixth highest debt, fifth highest deficit of 36 advanced economies, paying more to borrow money than everyone apart from Iceland and New Zealand. Are you worried?
Well, I think what it underlines actually is the fiscal realities that we've been talking about since before we came into government and since we came into government, and it partly is why the Chancellor's non-negotiable fiscal rules are so important. We said from day one the first duty of this government would be to deliver on economic stability, and that's everything that we've set out to do since we came into government. There's no doubt the public finances are in a difficult state, but what we've sought to do is stabilise them and also deliver the investment that unlocks the economic growth that helps us get out of this situation. So, I mean, everything we've done as a government is getting back onto that stable footing. The OBR's report really just underlines why that is so important.
Because there has been areas where you struggle to get savings past your backbenchers, winter fuel, and more recently, of course, on...
Define themselves as...
And the OBR has said, echoing really what you've said, planned tax rises have been reversed and more significantly planned spending reductions have also been abandoned. I guess my question is, do the left of your party need to get real on what needs to be done?
Well, look, I think there's a reality that everyone has to understand, which is that the public finances are difficult. It means we do need to prioritise spending, and if we want to spend in areas that really delivers on the outcomes that we've set out as a government, whether it's in the NHS or poverty or in my sector in energy, we then need to prioritise what our spending is. And
so what's
we
your
can't
message
spend
about
money
pensions
twice.
then? What's the message?
My message is, look, we're seeking to do as a government to deliver the change we were elected on. We were clear in our manifesto that the absolute bedrock of that was fiscal credibility. And in order to do that, the non-negotiable fiscal rules that the Chancellor's outlined are a key part of that. But it's also how we maintain confidence in the UK as a place to invest. And we've seen the benefits of that just in the past week, where the UK has been announced as one of in fact, the best place to invest in the world. So some of the sort of results of this economic credibility are coming back now, but also the investment.
But some of it
in
is
key
your responsibility as well. The OBR said, the recent announcements on increasing defence spending, reversing cuts to winter fuel payments, scaling back welfare reforms present new downside risks to the fiscal position. So they're saying that there are downside risks that are on your watch.
But we've also been really clear that why the comprehensive spending review was so important, that we've taken account of all of those things. We've gone back to the very blank sheet of paper on where departments are spending money to make sure we are spending every penny of taxpayers' money in the most efficient and effective way. We don't disagree with that. Every penny of spending should be accounted for and driving towards our missions as a government, but with that bedrock of fiscal credibility.
Talking about every penny of spending, junior doctors, or resident doctors as they're now known, have voted in favour of strike action. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I always start by saying the role that everyone in our NHS plays is critically important. So, we're grateful to doctors for everything they do. They have had a significant pay rise over the 3-year period. The Health Secretary's been very clear. He engaged with them from day one in a way the previous government did not. But we think they have now got a fair pay settlement. And that's the bottom line for government, is that is a fair settlement.
So they don't think so. They say that it didn't take into account historical pay freezes.
Well, partly it did, actually. I mean, look, we were really clear that actually the previous government didn't even discuss many of these issues with the BMA. The Health Secretary, in week one, engaged in those conversations because we did think that actually there was some unfairness at the heart of that. But we do think the pay settlement they've got is significant. Of course, it's right for unions to represent their workers, but I think in this particular case, actually, the majority of doctors either voted against it or didn't participate in it. So we think it is a fair settlement on the table, and that's the line the government has set on this.
So I guess is your message to the unions the same as to some of those backbenchers, that they need to get real about the state of the public finances?
Well, look, I don't think it's about getting real. I think it's about saying there are limitations on what government can do. We do have to balance the pay cases for everyone across the public sector. We have to be fair in those. Yes, we have to reward doctors for the crucial role that they play and for the really critical role they play in holding the NHS together. But we think that is a fair settlement that's on the table at the moment, and that's the line we've taken.
Can I talk to you about Sizewell C? Of course, you've got this big announcement today. Nuclear power station just had a big investment from the French firm EDF. Is it a problem when foreign-owned companies take, big stakes in UK critical infrastructure?
Well, I think really excitingly today, this is EDF announcing they want to be a partner in delivering Sizewell C, which is part of our announcement of a new golden age of nuclear, a really significant investment. Sizewell C, when constructed, will deliver power for 6 million homes. So this is a hugely important project for the country. And it's a partnership between the UK government, the French government and private investors who will come forward in the coming months leading up to the final investment decision on Sizewell. Clearly, the involvement of foreign countries is on a case-by-case basis. We were really clear that the role of China in the future of our nuclear fleet will not, they won't have a part to play in that. But we've got a long-standing history with the French on engaging in nuclear projects. They bring a huge skill set, but they're a really important investor, and today's an exciting day.
My other question, I guess, is about the length of time it's going to take to complete this. I mean, it must be quite frustrating. I read that the environmental impact assessment is longer than the complete works of Shakespeare. I mean, it's no wonder we never get anything built here, right?
They're hugely frustrating. We've been really honest about that. It is ridiculous, some of the lengths that it goes to build infrastructure. We're not saying that we want these things to just be green-lit without any planning. It's really important there's a process. But we've got so many examples of projects that are caught up year after year after year in delay and in process. And all we want is for that process to result in an outcome as fast as possible, because we've got investors interested in building things in Britain. But as long as this appears like you invest in Britain and it will take years to actually come to fruition, we won't succeed. So everything we've done about reforming the planning system is really important. It's also about changing the culture. As a government, we've said we want to build things in this country again. That means getting on and doing it.
We've talked about lots of serious things today, from Sizewell C to the state of the economy. So I hope you might kind of indulge me in this final question.
Oh,
I read that a couple of years ago you ran every single one of Glasgow's 6,000 odd streets. Is that right?
Yeah, I thought that was old news by now, but yeah, it was. I think you call it a moment of madness during lockdown.
Had a bit of time on your hands.
Yeah, pretty much. We were allowed out to exercise, so you might as well make the best of it. So yeah, it started off just a bit of exploring my local area and ended up running every single street in Glasgow. Some streets faster than others, I have to say, but it was great fun, and I encourage anybody to do it.
What's your favourite running song then?
Oh, I don't run with music. No, you've got no, not at all. It's really interesting.
So you ran 6,000 streets without any music?
Yeah. And it's about 3,000 kilometres.
Just with your own thoughts?
I should say it wasn't all in one go. It did take 2 years.
OK.
But great fun.
OK, there you go. Thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? Keir Starmer's former political director, Luke Sullivan, and the broadcaster, Daisy McAndrew. Great to have you both here. I mean, it's hard to find much to be optimistic about when you read the OBR's findings, isn't it? I mean, really, who would be a politician, Daisy?
Well, I don't think you'd want to be a government politician at the moment. You'd want to be sniping from the side rather than, the opposition, rather than trying to put out the fire from the centre. The problem is, which we've said so many times before, this government is damned if it does, damned if it doesn't. Because in order to get into government, and I'm not blaming them for that, but they promise things that they can't deliver. They promised no tax rises. They promised fiscal rules, even though it was very, very clear that the financial state of the country was very, very bad. So they promised something that now they can't deliver. Then they said it was a big, surprising black hole. Then they tried to fix that black hole by doing welfare reforms. Then they failed to do that, so the black hole's even bigger. And we are now in a situation where there wasn't much wriggle room before, but there is absolutely zero now. We're down a cul-de-sac with nowhere to go.
It feels to me, it's like we've got these big kind of existential questions about the British economy and, how much tax people are willing to pay and the public services that they expect for that are just out of line. I mean, Luke, where do you think Keir Starmer goes from here?
Well, absolutely. I think anybody reading the OBR summary today would just be struck by what an absolutely terrible position the UK's finances are in. And this isn't about any one government. This is about decisions that successive governments have taken or failed to take. And I think, when I look back on my adult life, it has almost been constant perma-crisis, whether it was the global financial crash in 2007-8. We then had austerity, we had Brexit, we've had a pandemic. We now have a world which is incredibly dangerous in terms of the global security situation. Politicians have to make some really tough decisions, but also what voters expect and the trade-offs they're prepared to make. Because I don't agree with your analysis on the decisions that the Labour Party have taken, but what they did do, and it was a part of the electoral strategy, which was to tie itself very tightly to closing down its options. And that does mean there are very few options that any government can make. And, as the OBR sets out, we need to have a serious conversation about, the benefits that people expect for living in this country, whether that be pensions or other benefits.
I would agree with you and half disagree. Things like the ageing population, that is no surprise to anybody.
Which is a good thing.
I've been in journalism for 30 years, and this has been the ticking time bomb for 30 years that no government is grasping, because they don't have to in the short term. They can just kick it, down the road and let somebody else worry about it. So that has been, as you said, Labour and Conservative and coalition governments, they all completely failed on that. Then you do have more short-term issues, like having to increase our spending on defence. That has happened as the world has got a lot more dangerous in the last few years. So I have sympathy that money has to be found from somewhere. And so, of course, we're left in this situation where you're saying, what are we willing to pay for? But it's not just what are we willing to pay for. What can people pay for? A lot of people don't have any spare money. They're in debt. There's a cost of living crisis.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Luke, I'm interested to get your take on whether, because we're talking about the public's expectations, right? But also, what about the expectations of Labour MPs, trade unions, people on the left? Are they going to have to do some serious thinking?
I do. I think. And part of what happened last week on welfare, and I think that's probably what you're referring to, part of MPs are asking to be more involved, to be listened. I think they also have to accept that the choices that they are going to make have consequences, that come the budget, in October or November, whenever it is, Labour MPs are going to be faced with some very, very difficult choices, which is, Rachel has invested a lot of money in public services, but at that has come, a cost in terms of, tax rises or other spending cuts. And, ultimately, it can't all be on Rachel and Keir and the Cabinet to say, to hold the line all the time. Labour MPs also have to have that responsibility of understanding that, economic, at the heart of everything comes economic credibility. And we've already seen, even in our, the last 3 years, we've seen what happens when governments lose control.
But do you think you lose credibility when you try to put something through Parliament with a very big majority and you fail, and then you do it, another time or another, 2 times, and suddenly any credibility you had has gone because you can't control your backbenchers? My understanding is a lot of these backbenchers think to themselves, I'm not going to be here in 4 years, and I want my constituents are more important to me. If I'm going to have a short parliamentary life, my constituents are more important to me than my future in Parliament, because I'm probably not going to get to be Minister anyway, because I'm probably going to lose my seat in 4 years.
I do think welfare is a very specific issue for the Labour Party. And, the Prime Minister's already said that he's going to reflect. I think one of the things that Keir has shown throughout his political leadership of the Labour Party is when he's had bumps along the road, he has reacted, he's changed to events. I think, one of my views on welfare was actually what they were asking MPs to vote on was, in the grand scheme of things, quite small. There was a bigger reform package. There was a better way of selling this, both to the public, to Labour MPs, that would have been, frankly, actually, we need a much bigger fundamental argument about welfare and some of the other benefits and, things like pensions, about what are people prepared to pay for.
And we need a very big, honest discussion about the NHS and how we can continue to fund that. And the fact that it's the biggest employer, pretty much the 5th biggest in the world, it's the biggest in Europe, that's crazy. It doesn't work.
Really interesting discussion. Thank you both very much indeed, Luke and Daisy there. Now, you're watching the Politics Hub coming up. The inquiry into the Post Office scandal calls for urgent action on compensation as the first stage of the Chair's report lays bare the suffering of wrongly accused sub-postmasters and their families. Stay with us. Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first. Hello, welcome back. Now, suicides, mental illness, divorce, bankruptcies, addiction, just some of the fallout suffered by wrongly accused sub-postmasters and their families, identified today by the Post Office Inquiry Chair. Sir Wyn Williams laid the blame on what he called wholly unacceptable behaviour by the Post Office and Fujitsu, and he's now calling for urgent action to ensure all victims receive full and fair compensation. Here's Sky's Adele Robinson.
It should haunt the people who did it.
The Post Office destroyed Seema's life.
It's like keeping you alive, but cutting you small, giving you a wound till you die. There's more horrible way to kill somebody.
Convicted and imprisoned while pregnant, 20 years on, the first official inquiry report into the scandal is delivered.
It's been a really frightening, angry journey, but it's all going in the right direction now.
A direction focused on what was described as the disastrous impact of what happened to thousands of victims, with 13 people believed to have taken their lives because of it.
The picture which has emerged and which is described in my report is profoundly disturbing. In summary, what does that picture reveal? Many thousands of people have suffered serious financial detriment, and for a sizable proportion, that detriment subsists. Many people have, inevitably, suffered emotional turmoil and significant stress.
His report described wholly unacceptable behaviour by the Post Office and Fujitsu, concluded that Post Office bosses maintained a fiction that the faulty Horizon system was always accurate, and criticised redress schemes for being flawed.
You still don't have the money that you're entitled
No.
to.
I know. And this is our own money we're asking for. All the suggestions are very good, but it's the government need to follow and implement that.
Do you have faith that they will?
It have to be done. It should be sorted. We won't give up.
The report, however, said there had been a failure to grasp formidable difficulties in delivering redress.
We heard the rather stark figures that 13 people are believed to have taken their own lives as a result of what happened. What would you say to them for the part that the Post Office played in that?
I mean, look, some of the human impacts, apology is not sufficient. The harm that the Post Office has caused to people over decades is just completely unacceptable. It's horrific, is the only way to describe it. So, I am genuinely really, really sorry, but that's not enough.
Sir Wyn also called for urgent action to deliver full and fair redress. And he made 19 recommendations, but of course none of them are legally binding. So the bigger, more important issue now is exactly what the Post Office, the government and Fujitsu plan to deliver in response, and how quickly they do it.
To be clear, I am very sympathetic to Sir Wyn's 19 recommendations today.
The government will respond after carefully considering them and have said they're pushing Fujitsu to act on compensation.
There is no doubt that Fujitsu has a moral obligation to contribute towards the costs of this scandal. We have underlined that in face-to-face meetings to them. To be fair, they have accepted that they have that moral obligation. We have made clear to them that we think they should make an interim payment.
Among the recommendations, redress for the family members of victims worst affected by the scandal. The daughters of Elaine Hood, convicted in 2003, welcome it.
It's validating for all those years, for every one of us that's suffered because of what we've been through with our parents. I'd say it's validating.
Yeah, it's very validating, yeah.
It's not closure, though, is it?
No.
No.
Closure will be prosecutions at the end and real justice.
Fujitsu, meanwhile, reiterated their apology for their role in victims' suffering, said they're considering recommendations and are engaged with government on contributing to compensation. They, the Post Office and government, have until October to respond to the report.
That gives them their summer holiday to work on it, doesn't it, For goodness sake, get on with it and get on with paying people, because we are all sick to the back teeth of it.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
Well, let's talk to Luke and Daisy, shall we? I think the thing that gets me about this is it's not just the length of time that people are having to wait, but, some people are dying without getting their compensation, what they need, Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, the thing that comes through in the report is that this is, obviously it's a huge failure, but it's a human tragedy. I mean, the report talks about 13 people, sadly, who have been identified as taking their lives as a result of this, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. These, there are people who went to prison, and had their children there, and those are things that when the state and those who are part of, being part of the state and those big miscarriages of justice happen, there are simply no words.
But the thing about these cases, and we've seen so many throughout the years, is the first thing that always strikes me is the whistleblowers are never believed. At the beginning, if you go right back and you have an inquiry, that's number one. So that needs to be changed. Secondly, when you have these issues, where does the compensation come from? How fast is it going to be paid? Who's going to get it? All those issues, which again, seemingly are deliberately dragged out so that people die. Or people, we've seen it with infected blood, we've seen it with all sorts of different issues. And then there's the really important one, which is lessons learnt. Which never, ever... we talk about lessons learnt, but actually you have 19 recommendations. Some of them, I'm sure, would make a great, a big difference and stop something like this happening in the past. You never really see them being enacted. And it just seems to me that there should be a different way of investigating these things. One that takes far less time. Whether it's an investigation into lockdowns, which we've seen, whether it's Leveson looking at phone tap, whatever it might be. We just seem to be so good at dragging these things out, and the only people that get rich are lawyers. Always.
It's true, isn't it? I just don't understand why these things do take... what are they... these things are not that complicated, are they? I just don't really understand why it is taking this so long.
Well, I think to your point, and I think there's another point here, which is at the heart of this was people not believed, and there were some incredible people who campaigned, including parliamentarians. The system in many ways tried to ring the alarm, but there's a really interesting question at the heart of this, which was the computer was believed. Actually, going in, this was a scandal that happened at the back end of the 90s, the early part of the 21st century. We're 25 years in, and our world is becoming ever more digital. People trust computers, but how do you question when things go wrong? And these are huge questions for the state, but also for business and wider economy.
And it actually comes back to the chat we were having before about the general state of the British economy. Because we have so little headroom, fiscal headroom, wriggle room, when things like this come up, or infected blood, where you have to dig deep and find some money to give innocent people compensation, the money isn't there. And you find that suddenly that's, I think, one of the reasons why they do take so long, because you'll get a Chief Secretary to the Treasury saying, we would love to pay the post office victims, but the computer says no, as in our budget says no. But, so let's make it someone else's problem.
And there's another point here, which is ultimately the state is, gonna cough up. But at the heart of this is also a private company and contractor, and it's quite right they also pay their fair share and there's big questions for them as well.
Yeah, thanks both. Really interesting chat. Thanks very much indeed. Well, of course, the initial findings of that inquiry are sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj and the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman. Now, President Macron has begun his 3-day state visit to the UK. After a carriage ride in Windsor with the King, he headed to Westminster, I should say, to address both houses of Parliament. And he used his speech to press for a ceasefire in Gaza, and ahead of a summit with the PM tomorrow, also said that they would be making tangible results on migration. Here's our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills.
Stepping off the plane, immediately they were met by friendly faces. The Prince and Princess of Wales very deliberately sent to collect President Macron and his wife Bridget. The first sign that this visit was something special. Arriving in Windsor, an old friend was waiting for them. The bond clear between the King and Macron, with an affectionate hand, not once, but twice. Sorry, 3 times. As both couples appeared deep in conversation, there was plenty more to say as they made their way to their carriages. For a spectacle that only the UK can deliver, their procession just inches away from the crowds as they made their way to Windsor Castle. A guard of honour was waiting for the President to inspect the historic setting underpinning the current importance of our military ties. Macron is, of course, known for being tactile. The interactions felt more gentle here, not a political power play for the cameras. That was being reserved for elsewhere. With the closeness between them all, you'd almost think that the royals had personally invited the Macrons. But in the end, it's down to number 10 who comes here for a state visit. And with all the reports around immigration and the small boats issue, this visit does come at a really important time, with hopes that maybe a little bit of soft power may help with those difficult conversations that will lie ahead. With Macron whisked into London, we had the first obvious display of the political significance as he addressed both houses of Parliament.
France and the United Kingdom have a shared responsibility to address irregular migration with humanity, solidarity and firmness. The decisions that we will take at our bilateral summit will respond to our aims for cooperation and tangible results on these major issues.
There is always pressure to deliver the perfect welcome. The French delegation's bags, the only faux pas that we saw so far. As the King, with the help of a few royal trinkets, reinforced that message of a shared history, especially powerful when delivered with a personal touch. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Windsor Castle.
Now, the MP James McMurdock has said he won't return to Reform UK after resigning the party whip. The MP for South Basildon in East Thurrock suspended himself last week pending the outcome of an investigation into allegations around business propriety during the pandemic. He said last week that all of his business dealings have always been conducted fully within the law and in compliance with all regulations. Right, let's bring in our political correspondent Tamara Cohen, who's here with us. What more do we know then?
So James McMurdock, who was elected as a Reform MP, has already been in quite a lot of trouble already after it was revealed he went to jail for assaulting his girlfriend when he was a teenager, claims about his CV and his alleged work in the financial sector. On Sunday Times, it was revealed he had claimed £70,000 in COVID bounce-back loans, that scheme that was up and running during the pandemic, for two companies he ran, except that one had no employees and the other one appears to have been dormant, so they wouldn't have met the standards for all this. Now, at the time, he said on Sunday that he'd done everything correctly within the law and within the regulations. Now, today, he said something rather different this afternoon. He said, "Further to my statement on the 5th of July, I've now had a chance to take specialist legal advice from an expert in the relevant field. In the light of that advice, which is privileged, in which I choose to keep private at this time, I have decided to continue my parliamentary career as an independent MP, where I can focus 100% on the interests of my constituents." So he now says he's not returning to Reform. They will be down another MP, so that party is down to 4. Now, the Labour Party chairman has gone for Nigel Farage, the party leader, over this, saying, "Why aren't you doing anything to discipline him?" Now, Reform say that they are going to investigate it anyway. Mr McMurdock hasn't said what exactly the details of this business is, but Nigel Farage also admitted that he'd done no vetting on the candidates in the general election, saying he inherited them. He said they'll run a more professional operation in future. But this is the party that is leading the opinion polls to be forming the next government. And we now have another MP who is outside of the party in strange circumstances.
Tamara, thank you very much indeed. Tamara Cohen speaking to us there. Well, as, of course, Reform grows, so does scrutiny on the party, and perhaps no one more so than in Wales, where they're seen as a real threat to Labour. The First Minister there admitted that Reform UK could dominate at the May election, and a more uncommon poll for Sky News has found that 28% of people in the country would vote for Reform if an election was called tomorrow. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, reports.
Wales has long been Labour, and Welsh Labour is the most successful party in the world. It has run the Parliament here for 26 years on the trot, the Senedd red, ever since devolution began. But polling suggests only half of those who voted Labour in the 2024 election would back them for the Senedd elections right now. We brought a group of voters from across Wales together to give their verdict on Reform's rise and Labour's fall. U-turns were first on voters' minds.
Essentially, I feel like they've not just been backtracking on sort of independent policies, they've been backtracking on who they say they are, really.
And some still willing to give Labour the benefit of the doubt.
The benefits, the U-turn on benefits. I mean, the papers are saying it's a weakness. I think it's a democracy.
But when asked this question...
Who is the main opposition to Labour now?
There was one answer.
As much as we don't want to admit it, I think it's Reform.
Reform. Yeah, I think they're the main opposition, and I think they'll get in.
But hope for Labour too. Reform have not sealed the deal.
The only thing is, I didn't realise till last week, Reform haven't even got a Welsh leader. So what use is that to us?
And do you like Nigel Farage?
I think he's off his head. You know, like I'm going to relight the blast furnaces. Does he not realise they've all melted and he couldn't do it even if he wanted to? I think he will get things done, without a doubt. He's going to shake it up if he gets in.
Most of the group we just heard from there used to be Labour voters. But apart from a couple of supportive voices in that group, most of them were really disappointed with Labour's first year and with Keir Starmer. They were frustrated, they were disillusioned, they were distrustful. And what's more, almost all of them thought that Reform was now Labour's main opposition in Wales, which suggests to me that Nigel Farage's messaging is really working and cutting through.
Hello. Hi, Ellen. Croeso I Gymru.
That's something that worries Wales's First Minister.
We're taking it very seriously, and we think the threat from Reform is a very serious threat.
Do you feel you're to blame a bit, along with the other sort of political, the political class, if you like?
So I think we've got a lot of work to do to get voters back. I think we've got to lead with our values. So we're about bringing communities together, not dividing them. So what I won't be doing in Wales is chasing Reform down a path.
Do you think Reform could win the Senedd?
There is a possibility that they could be the largest party. And that is something that is really concerning.
Next May's Senedd elections are set to be the most consequential in the Assembly's 26 years. After total dominance in Wales for decades, Labour suddenly finds itself the underdog. The First Minister is right to worry. Beth Rigby, Sky News Wales.
Fascinating stuff there from Beth, and you can hear more of that chat with the Wales First Minister in a special episode of the Electoral Dysfunction podcast, out now a little earlier in the week than usual. Now, Lord Tebbit, a titan of the Thatcher government, has died aged 94. The former Conservative minister was a leading political voice throughout the turbulent 1980s, taking a robust stance on unemployment and also the trade union movement as well. He was also a survivor of an IRA bombing in 1984 that left his wife paralysed. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has been taking a look back at his life and career.
Thank you to Norman Tebbit.
Praise from Margaret Thatcher after her 1987 election victory, when he was Tory chairman. Fiercely proud of his working-class roots, Norman Tebbit was idolised by the Tory right and loathed by the left. After becoming an MP in 1970, he became an enemy of the trade unions over strikes and the closed shop. Labour's Michael Foot called him a semi-house-trained polecat. And during riots, he said of his unemployed father, he didn't riot, he got on his bike and looked for work. In her 1981 reshuffle, in which she purged cabinet wets and brought in true believers, Mrs Thatcher made him employment secretary. With tough anti-strike laws, he became the scourge of the unions. He revelled in his hard man image and his Chingford skinhead nickname.
Really, Norman, you are a sight.
Even enjoying being ridiculed on TV's spitting image. After the Tories' 1983 landslide, he became Trade and Industry Secretary after another Thatcher favourite, Cecil Parkinson, quit in a sex scandal. But within months, his life was torn apart by an IRA bomb at the 1984 Tory conference in Brighton. He and wife Margaret were trapped in the rubble, and his dramatic rescue was broadcast live on TV. He spent 3 months in hospital, and his wife was left paralysed. He returned to the cabinet as party chairman, and despite clashes with another Thatcher favourite, Lord Young, masterminded another Tory victory. After leaving the cabinet, he still made news, causing a huge row with cricket test comments about Asian supporters. And when John Major succeeded Mrs Thatcher as PM, Tebbit bitterly opposed the Maastricht Treaty.
Do you want other countries interfering in our immigration controls, in our foreign policy? Do you want to be citizens of a European Union?
The Tory faithful loved it. After quitting as an MP in 1992, he was awarded a peerage and continued his Eurosceptic fight in the Lords, attacking Theresa May's Brexit deal.
Why is everybody here today so excited about an amendment which looks after the foreigners and not the British?
And gay marriage.
But the present law of marriage does not discriminate against homosexuals.
Lord Tebbit's death prompted tributes from senior politicians.
He was one of the giants of the Thatcher era before his political career was cut short by the attack on the Grand Hotel in Brighton.
He was an icon. We respected him for so many reasons. The battles he fought during the Thatcher government.
But for the Brighton bomb, Norman Tebbit might have reached the very top of British politics by succeeding Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister in 1990. But he stepped back from the front line to care for his wife, who died in 2020. He never forgave the IRA.
Well, John joins us now alongside our duo, of course, Luke and Daisy as well. John, he was a giant at the Thatcher era, as you were saying in your report there. I see you've been delving into your cuttings book as well.
Well, we saw it in my report there. This is the front page of the Today newspaper, April the 20th, 1990. Tebbit race bouncer. That was his very controversial remarks about what he called the cricket test. Which side do the Asians cheer for at cricket? I mean, it was controversial then, still is. And he was attacked for it, not just by political opponents, but by some Conservative MPs. I see I've got a quote here, for my story, by the way.
Of course, get that in.
I see there's a quote here attacking him, Patrick Cormack. Remember Patrick Cormack?
My first job was working for Patrick
Very much
Cormack.
on the left of the Tory party, wasn't he?
1992.
Yeah. But I remember Norman, back in the 80s, I worked for the Sunday Times and then I worked for the Today newspaper. And he was very proud of his working class background, and he regarded a lot of the people in the Tory party as snobs and toffs. I remember once talking to him, and it was when he was Tory chairman, and he was talking about snobbery in the Tory party, and he said, "Oh, they think I eat peas off my knife." I don't know whether I assume he was joking, but he really was a hammer of the unions, wasn't he? I mean, that reshuffle in 1981. Thatcher, of course, she had a bumpy start to her premiership, a bit like Sir Keir is now, although some people say this one's much worse. But, I mean, she had a big reshuffle in 81, purged all the wets. Jim Pryor, who had been Employment Secretary, the Tory supporting press called him Pussyfoot Pryor for not taking on the unions, and he was brought in to hammer the unions. She brought in other favourites like Cecil Parkinson, Nigel Lawson, and so on.
And Daisy, did you ever have any dealings with?
I did. Yeah. When I started working for the House magazine when I was in my early 20s, just after working for Patrick Cormack.
And you've got your front pages laminated.
I do have.
You were the editor, weren't you?
I was. Well, Patrick Cormack was the editor. I was the managing editor. Oh, right. Anyway, Norman used to write for us, and I interviewed him many times. And just as a lot of people have been reminiscing today, his public image was very different to how he was in person. He was incredibly polite, incredibly charming, you know, very, very, I mean, almost quite softly spoken. He just looked so sort of gaunt and scary that it was very easy to think he was a lot more frightening than he did seem in person.
And it's interesting, look, because we're going to have lots of people paying tribute to him, talking about, you know, the incredible support he gave to his wife, for example, which I think is something that lots of people will remember. But he was a controversial figure, as John was picking up on there as well, right?
Yeah, hugely. And you just from John's excellent video there, you can see he was he was a controversial figure. He had very strong opinions and he argued them very strongly. But I think what shone through today, and from my very limited seeing him around in the House of Lords and speaking, I think David Blunkett's spoken today about getting to know him later in life, is, yes, he had very strong views and he pursued them mercilessly and not my politics. And I think, you know, there's some decisions he's made which were very bad. However, he also did it in a spirit of civility, in, you know, being able to, you know, still speak to people. And I think through everything he went through, and you just look at the video footage of the Brighton bombing, that human bravery, the decency, the spending his time with his family, but also, you know, carrying on in democratic politics, which is ultimately what it's all about.
You've been delving into the Sky archives as well.
Ah, yes. Now, when Sky first started in 1989, he and the Labour MP Austin Mitchell presented a show called Target. Austin Mitchell, of course, had been a TV presenter before he became MP for Grimsby. And they interviewed some of the biggest figures. There's Ted Heath, for example, being interviewed by them. I remember seeing there was one with Paddy Ashdown. And they interviewed Ted, looking his usual grumpy self there.
Yeah.
Austin Mitchell looks a bit bored, doesn't he?
Yeah.
But it was a great programme. And it was, in the early days of Sky, Norman Tebbit and Austin Mitchell, two colourful characters, one from the Labour Party, one from the Tories, quizzing senior politicians.
I love it. I've just been told in my ear that our director actually used to do some of the directing.
Podcast
was it
of
like?
their day.
So it was really good. I love it. I love it. It was basically like the politics hub of its day.
Yes.
That's
exactly. But I think your point about class is really relevant with Norman Tebbit, because, you know, and before the sort of 70s and 80s, the Tory party was a party of posh people. We'd never had a Tory prime minister, let alone a female one, who was from a relatively normal background like Margaret Thatcher. And yet for her to bring in people who did have experience, and of course, in those days, what I think a lot of people found interesting was that the more working class the background of those particular politicians, actually the more radical they tended to be, the more right-wing they tended to be. They weren't the wets. The wets tended to be the posh ones, the hardliners.
Like Willie Whitelaw.
Yeah, exactly. And it was coming to terms with a new reality of the Tory party where, you know, and of course we've seen it again with the sort of influx of Etonians now, but where the sort of the working class Tories were a very different being.
Might be in Reform today.
I think the other thing that came through is what a great communicator he was. You look back and, you know, what a great at doing the sound clip.
Totally right. Yeah. It's been great to have her on. Thank you very much. And always good to have you with the Cuttings book as well, John. Gotta love it. That's it for us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette. And we're, of course, expecting speeches from the King and President Macron.